So the biggest consequence of a data breach for me really is just the human impact to the end user. If it's definitely something that's been accidental, just that emotional impact is something that I take like very, very importantly.
For me, the biggest consequence of a data breach or data breaches is the gradual erosion of trust that is happening in society, where people are becoming completely desensitized to data breaches in such a way that they don't even notice them anymore. And I think that's a really, really bad place for us as an industry to be.
I think for me, the biggest consequence of a data breach is reputation, and how that leaves your reputation. And these days, so many breaches going on, how you deal with that breach and how open you are with customers and clients and everything else, I think is probably a key differentiator. But for me, I think definitely reputation, and making sure that you hopefully maintain it or coming out, as well as possible from any event.
Data breaches in general can be catastrophic for organizations in many ways. Reputational, monetary, could also be impactful to employees and confidential information and intellectual property. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we see from a data breach perspective is, especially across the globe, is our ability to create intellectual property and our companies that make us unique in ourselves. So research and development, those types of things is what I would consider most sensitive in data breach type categorizations. And so when we see data breaches where they're targeting research and development, companies' intellectual property, source code, those types of things, those are probably some of the biggest impactful ones. Obviously supply chain comes to mind as well. Can you impact one to many during a data breach? So, instead of just hitting, the initial company itself, can you hit thousands or tens of thousands of customers? Those are all alarming trends that we're seeing, as of today. So I would say intellectual property theft as well as supply chain attacks are going to be some of the biggest consequences that you see from a data breach. And then, how do you go back and retroactively think or see what they actually had access to? It just takes a lot of time and effort, especially as attackers have entrenched themselves for such a long period of time in an environment. Those are some of the major consequences that we see from data breaches, and then the loss of intellectual property theft.
I think that the biggest consequence of a data breach, and I don't think this is fair, but is a loss of reputation for your company. So a loss of brand reputation. And I want to be able to reduce the stigma, to destigmatize it, because at the end of the day, every single organization is going to get hacked. And if we can just be, upfront about it and transparent, I think we can help, make sure that people will continue to maintain their brand. I think having transparency with your shareholders, with your stakeholders, with your customers is the most important thing.
I think there's two consequences of a big data breach. The most consequential is when that event actually impacts availability. I think we're still concerned about confidentiality and privacy and all the things that go along with that. But really the business impact is when you can't do business anymore. So I think one consequence of availability is a big deal. I think the second impact of a big breach like that is now you have organizational leadership who really understand cyber risk and information and security risk in ways they didn't before. And so I think one of the benefits, one of the good consequences of a breach is that people wake up and start to know what security professionals have been trying to say for a really long time. It's not the optimal way to get that learning, but it is nonetheless a learning that happens after a big breach, and it's good.
So what do I view as the biggest consequences of a data breach? For me, I got a couple different ways I could slice this, but one of the more interesting ones that's come up, or I've started to think about recently, is the amount of leverage that can be applied to a person when a sensitive system is breached. So a good example would be the Ashley Madison breach, or systems like that, right? Any system where I wanted a certain level of anonymity or privacy, and maybe the information that was exposed could be used against me, or you, or any person, and what happens then when now it's not just the fact that everybody in the world knows my social security number. I can deal with that, but when somebody knows something sensitive about me, and I now do not have autonomy, that becomes problematic.
The biggest consequence of a data breach is, you see it from the aspect of the internal security teams, and how they're working things, but the consequences for me is really the data that's been lost, the clients or the users' data who's now been stolen or being used or abused in some malicious way. We can always get better. We can always put better systems in place. We can always, step back and say what we could have done differently. But at that point, the data's out there. There's no coming back from that. And just figuring out exactly what those long-term ramifications are to those people and to those clients it's just very difficult.
So in my opinion, I believe that reputational damage is the biggest consequence of a data breach. I think people need to be able to trust the companies, and especially in my world from a legal point of view, customer and client confidence has to be the number one priority. So people need to trust us with their information. If they cannot trust us with it, how are they supposed to do business with us?